Everything going on in the world is due to expression and reception of many different kinds. And I want to talk more about that today because it all sort of boils down to that masculine and feminine energy, divine masculine, divine feminine, or wounded masculine and wounded feminine. The reason why this is so important at this time is because the energy playing out is shifting over from this wounded masculine and feminine energy and into more of a sacred and divine masculine and feminine energy. And when I mention masculine and feminine energy, it does not equal male and female. It is expressions or receptions of energy, which we'll talk more about today. The label of masculine and feminine, where does it come from? It comes from the English language. This is the best way to describe this type of energy that goes beyond what we label it, or that goes beyond what we maybe see it as in terms of male and female. So just keep that in mind. It has nothing to do with male and female. So let's talk about the wounds first, the wounded masculine and feminine. To understand the wounded masculine, we must first take a look at the wounded feminine. To put it very simply, the wounded feminine is a rejection of the ability to receive. This includes nutrients, nourishment, joy, love, and tenderness, as well as many other things in terms of reception. The reason the rejection of reception occurs is because a wall of protection takes place. So that feminine energy is receptive energy. And when we talk about the wounded feminine, again, it means a rejection of reception. So again, the reason the rejection of reception occurs is because a wall of protection takes place. The need to protect oneself is the repercussion of a wounded inner feminine. Why? Because something was received prior that resulted in the wound or continues to add to the wound, and the feeling of the inner wound is what creates the boundary, which creates the protection, which creates the block ultimately, the block to receive. You cannot choose what you receive. It is an energy flow. It's an energy channel. So when we put up the block of protection, we are usually putting it up to block out the unwanted, but in doing so, we're also putting up the block of protection to keep out the wanted too. This is because they both stream in through the same door. When we have a blocked door of reception, you can only imagine how energy both builds up and stagnates on both sides of that door, which is the inner and the outer. Now, in terms of the wounded masculine, to put it very simply, the wounded masculine is a rejection of the ability to self-express. So masculine energy is self-expression, and when we're talking about the wounded masculine, it is a rejection of the ability to self-express. It's a rejection of self-expression of some kind. So this includes the ability to share, to interact, to feel, reciprocate, act, and behave, and so much more in terms of self-expression. It also strongly connects with creativity too. And that sort of takes me into self-expression in terms of creativity is that masculine energy, and the reception that anchors or amplifies or activates that creativity is inspiration, and the inspiration is more of that feminine reception energy or receptive energy. So inspiration feeds creativity, creativity feeds inspiration, and that's a cycle all on its own in terms of the internal masculine and feminine, in terms of receiving inspiration and expressing creativity. To go back to this wounded masculine energy, the reason why this rejection of self-expression occurs is because at some point in time, or maybe it continues to happen, there was not a proper reception to what a person was expressing. In other words, there was a feedback of a person's expression that created the wound in the reception channels. For example, if you self-express and then you get a reaction or a feedback that says you're not good enough, that's not good enough, or that's not good, for example, you're receiving that direct energy of what you're putting out, what you're expressing. Internally, the body recognizes this energy exchange as what I am expressing is wounding myself. As you can see, it's sort of that boomerang energy. What I am expressing is also not serving me because it's creating a wound as I'm receiving the feedback or the reception of whatever I'm putting out. So the buildup of this energy blockage, which is the rejection of reception and the rejection of self-expression, cultivates energy within the body that does not know what to do with itself, ultimately. Energy pathways are blocked in both expressing and receiving. So the body becomes insulated within its own blockages and barriers of protection. The energy builds up until there is an eruption of some kind, usually through emotional eruption or physical disease. So what are the byproducts of a wounded masculine? Again, the inability to self-express. What are the byproducts? Essentially, a wounded masculine cultivates external judgment, people-pleasing, and conformity. It places external awareness above internal knowledge and places external expectation above internal needs and desires. In other words, the external world begins to shape who the person is and how they express themselves in a way that meets the expectations of the world around them. This is because they're also trying to please that inner wounded feminine. Again, they're connected. They're trying to please their inner wounded feminine the way that they are receiving the world around them. So if they continue to receive feedback that opens their wounds over and over and over again, they're going to try even harder to meet the expectations of the external environment or the external physical environment through the way that they self-express, through that wounded masculine. So the wounded masculine is always going to feed into a wounded feminine, and a wounded feminine is always going to feed into the wounded masculine. So on the other side, what are the byproducts of a wounded feminine? Again, a wounded feminine is the inability to receive. What are the byproducts of a wounded feminine? Essentially, a wounded feminine cultivates internal judgment, fear, and repression. Again, a wounded masculine cultivates external judgment, people-pleasing, and conformity. So wounded feminine cultivates, again, internal judgment, fear, and repression. It manifests a person's survival mode. So this is what really turns on a person's survival mode instincts through the internal judgment, fear, and repression. And then these internal survival mode instincts go on to become a person's form of self-expression, which again feeds into a person's wounded masculine. Now let's talk about healing. With the rise of divine feminine, which is going on through ascension, through awakening, through a person's spiritual quest, with this rise of divine feminine, how is the wounded feminine healing and transforming or transmuting or transcending into its divine counterpart, the divine sacred feminine? What came through is that with the rise of divine feminine, the wounded feminine says, I see all of you. The divine feminine is able to witness all parts of the self and what the self is connected to. and therefore it receives nourishment or nurturing from whatever it's connected to, whatever it recognizes that it's connected to. So there's a lot more of that external awareness because the divine feminine is receiving all of that external awareness and receiving it as part of you. This all essentially reflects upon how that person receives themselves, both externally and internally. The healing of the wounded feminine is essentially the healing of the inner judgment through whatever they're receiving. The way that inner judgment used to receive energy through the wounded feminine is it would take energy and use that as information to divide a person's self-image into two categories internally. And those two categories are basically worthy or unworthy, good or bad, positive or negative. That's the inner duality. But the moment a person is able to awaken to their external environment, meaning you really start to see yourself as everything that you're connected to in a conscious manner, you begin to tame that inner judgment and you begin to receive all of who you are, whether it's good or bad, positive or negative, worthy or unworthy. You receive everything as exactly who you are. When this happens, many of the self-limiting beliefs also begin to fall away, including fear. This process means that the person is able to meet themselves head-on and face, or more so redeem, is the word that came through, many parts of themselves that they have previously rejected, repressed, or even revered, usually through ego. As a person heals their receptive pathways, the feminine pathways, it also naturally affects their expressive pathways, the masculine pathways. So the healing of the masculine works alongside the healing of the feminine. So to go into the healing of the wounded masculine, the healing of the wounded masculine says, I see all of me. I see who I am. Again, the healing of the wounded feminine says, I see all of you. The healing of the wounded masculine says, I see all of me. I see who I am. The divine masculine is able to witness all parts of the self internally, and this begins to cultivate a sense of embodiment, inner pleasure, and inner sight. And of course, this all reflects upon how a person expresses themselves. Healing the wounded masculine is about processing that who you are is what you are expressing into the world, and that it's not about meeting an expectation that already exists in the world, but it's about becoming a force that surpasses it. Regardless of how people, places, and things receive your energy and offer you feedback, if you will, the way that you receive whatever energy due to the energy that you're expressing is going to be in a way that you can see yourself more and more. You're just receiving more and more of yourself, regardless if it's within that duality spectrum, good, bad, positive, negative, worthy or unworthy. You are receiving it as you are seeing yourself. The ability to be open to receiving that energy as exactly who you are, whether, again, it's good or bad, positive, negative, worthy or unworthy, is what strengthens and helps heal that inner feminine energy. Now let's talk about embodiment. The embodiment of divinity, which is ultimately your divine nature being embodied, is where the divine masculine meets and embraces the reception of the divine feminine, that yin and yang symbol coming together to create that wholeness in your divinity, the divine whole. And it's also where the divine masculine self-expresses that internal divine nature in exactly the way that the divine feminine would receive it. Again, the embodiment of your divine nature is where the divine masculine meets and embraces the reception of the divine feminine, and where the divine masculine self-expresses that internal divine nature, the wholeness, in exactly the way that the divine feminine would receive it. How you give and receive blends into one as they become the same. You are immediately receiving the energy of exactly what you are self-expressing, understanding that you do not self-express for anyone or anything externally, but you do so for yourself, to nurture yourself, to love yourself, to nourish your own divine inner being. So you see, what we observe in the world as, at this time, toxic masculinity, if you will, is just a byproduct of the collective's wounded self-expression mixed with wounded reception. Once those pathways begin to heal, harmonize, and unify with each other, the embodiment of the divine begins to motivate both self-expression and self-reception, and everything begins changing. So we right now have labeled it as toxic masculinity. But in essence, it's a combination of the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine playing together in what we're creating. Again, once those pathways begin to heal, the pathway of self-expression and the pathway of reception, once those begin to heal, how we show up in the world starts to change, because how we speak changes, how we share changes, how we love changes, how we grow changes, how we help others starts to change, how we receive others starts to change, how we receive the world starts to change. Now, the healing of the pathways of self-expression and reception can uncover a lot of deep inner stuff. A lot of like the inner illusions that we built upon our wounded masculine and wounded feminine, our wounded self-expression and our wounded reception. This can certainly bleed into what our conscious mind may consider a lot of different things in terms of what masculine energy and feminine energy means. A lot of times, again, going back to the beginning, it has nothing to do with male or female, but it can be expressed that way. It can be translated that way. It can be interpreted that way. On an illusionary unconscious level, the body already subscribes to certain ways of thinking because everything sort of is put into boxes. So if the pathways of self-expression and reception are not cleared, if they haven't clarified, if they haven't healed, if they haven't opened, allowing for energy to freely flow in its most pure and natural state, then a lot of those deep inner energies that used to be repressed or rejected due to all of those trauma wounds, as those things start to rise, it will rise to the surface and create more chaos and confusion in both the receptive and expressive pathways. Our planet is in an unveiling stage of collective experience in terms of this ascension, in terms of this uprising, in terms of this awakening, in terms of this spiritual transcendence and spiritual quest. But if you haven't yet done the work to open and maintain clear pathways in terms of your receptive pathways and your expressive pathways, your internal masculine and feminine pathways, then the stuff coming up for you and the stuff being revealed to you ultimately is going to create more chaos and confusion in and around your physical form and your experience. The physical form also, what is inhabited within the physical form is your emotional and mental pathways as well. So a lot of like emotional and mental stuff is going to come up, and spiritual stuff too. But the point is, if those pathways are not clear, then as those things come up, it's going to create more chaos and confusion, simply because the energy has nowhere to go and it sort of recycles within itself, meaning the illusion creates more illusion within the internal state of being. So, for example, think of the pathways of expression and reception as drainage pathways, if you will, in terms of a physical form. If your drainage pathways are not cleared before starting, for example, a cleanse or a detox, then everything being cleansed or detoxed from the body it has nowhere to go. It cannot exit the body properly or drain from the body fully. And then you end up with backed up energy, backed up toxic sludge, right? And what that ultimately does is it wreaks havoc within the body because it has nowhere to go to drain out. So it recycles back through the body, through the blood, through the other streams within the body. So in turn, you feel more inflammation. Maybe it comes out through other areas, such as your skin. Even though you initially had the intention for healing, right? You had the intention to release and let go of a lot of those things, which the collective experience has at this time. But we have to pay attention to those specific two pathways of expression and reception in terms of our individual forms to allow for all of that intended healing to take place, to allow for all of that repressed and rejected energy, both individually and collectively, to be drained and released from our physical forms and experiences. Until then, we're going to experience, again, a lot of the confusion in terms of both expression and reception. And you can already see that we are witnessing a lot of that chaos and confusion rising to the surface. And the best thing that you can do right now is to work on your own pathways of masculine and feminine energy, expression and receptive energy, cycling within your own form so that you can start to clarify, you can start to open those pathways for yourself. And what this does is it starts to clarify your own lens, your own perception, your own experience, the way that you hold energy in your body. This allows you to see past the illusion. It allows you to see through the chaos and confusion and be able to witness more clarity despite the illusion, chaos, and confusion. So I had a question that came through that sparked this topic of healing the masculine, the wounded masculine energy, and I want to read the question. And it says, how do you help the wounded masculine heal? Or is it similar to that of how the feminine had to do it to rise, meaning going within? I witnessed a number of masculine with sole purpose of work, grind, just to be a provider for their future partner versus being present and cultivating a relationship now. It was sad to see that they could not meet me in a partnership and picked work over the relationship. And the reply that came through for this question is basically this episode. But specifically, the reason why we identify a lot of men, again, going back to masculine and feminine energies being male and female, it has nothing to do with that. But it just so happens that men have a lot more wounded masculine energy internally. But we sort of surpass seeing that men also carry a lot of wounded feminine, which is why we are seeing the wounded masculine so much in men. So this is what came through. The reason why we identify a lot of men specifically having prominent wounded masculine energy is because their ability to receive has been blocked. So keep that in mind. So essentially, even though we may be seeing their wounded masculine, there's also most likely a very, very deep wounded feminine that they hold internally. You cannot have one without the other. So men who are caught up in their survival mode instincts, for example, needing to work, make money, provide, etc., they hold that way of self-expression because they have blocked their reception to nurturing, ease, and softness, and instead receive that energy as validation to their ego self, which cycles the energy of survival. So again, earlier, what I spoke about in terms of the wounded feminine triggering or activating that survival mode then creates that sort of self-identity within a person to self-express that same survival mode. And that is the cycle of the ego, essentially. These are the illusionary layers of self-expression and self-reception built upon the ego, not the true self. When their ability to receive can be healed, meaning they need to be able to recognize that they need nurturing, ease, and softness to let their guard down and see who they truly are, then their self-expression will change dramatically as well. So the whole healing cycle has to occur for the person, not just within their masculine energy, but specifically as well within their feminine energy. It's connected. So that's what came through for this episode. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your support. And I'll see you in the next episode. Oneness, love, and peace be with you.